There are certain chapters that when people talk about what needs to come to Dead by Daylight, they get discussed as, oh, these are the slam dunks, these are the Rushmore picks, these are the ones, the first round draft picks, the franchise changers. And by this point, I feel like most everybody's pretty sick of hearing about the same ones, but you know, I mean, it's Springtrap from Five Nights at Freddy's, it's Predator, it's Jason Voorhees in the Friday the 13th chapter, and for a long time, one of these was Alien and the Xenomorph. Which is why it's so crazy to me that after 3 months of it being in the game, it's time to actually ask the question, did the Alien chapter in Dead by Daylight fail? Hello friends, I'm DustFood, and today I want to look at the Alien chapter and see why there's kind of this general feeling around it that maybe it didn't quite hit like we expected it to. Now before anybody goes off and rushes to any conclusions, I do want to point out that obviously everybody's going to have their own subjective opinions about every single chapter. There are people who their favorite chapter was Tools of Torment, right? The Skull Merchant one. I hated that chapter. I've been very vocal about it. I did not like it, but some people loved it. By the same token, I'm a clown main. Most people didn't like that chapter. I loved it. So the whole point being, we're going to try to be more objective with this and kind of go for more, I guess, community consensus than any personal, well, I didn't like it, so this is a failure, or oh, I loved it, so this is the greatest chapter of all time. We are going to look at some of the numbers, and we're also going to go and just kind of break it down bit by bit and see what we can come up with. So I do need to start off with the numbers, because the numbers are what a lot of people are bringing up to try to make the case that Alien failed. It's what I've seen the most on places like Twitter. So the numbers matter, right? The numbers do matter. If you go to Steam charts, which by the way, as would be indicated by the name, does not take into account the Switch players, it doesn't take into account the Xbox players, it doesn't take into account the PlayStation players, and obviously it doesn't take into account the mobile players because that's basically a different game. So there are a lot of people who could be playing Dead by Daylight that are not playing on the Steam pages, right? They're not using the Steam client to play Dead by Daylight. There are even PC players that are not playing on Steam. So to say that this creates a fractured version of reality would be completely fair. Now, I do think that it's fair to say that there is a pretty good case to be made that Steam is where the most players play out of all of the platforms, but there are no hard numbers on that, so it's more of just a theory than an outright fact. It does matter. I would say it absolutely matters. What the Steam charts look like do have some indication. They offer some light on where the game currently is. And in the case of the Alien chapter, the numbers are not especially great. So it saw, as soon as Alien came out, right? It came out in August of 2023, and August saw a decrease of 5,067 players. But to be fair, Alien came out towards the end of the month. So did September bounce back? Not at all. They lost 5,904 players in September. After that, in October, which of course was also when we started getting the October event for Dead by Daylight, they only gained 916 players. If you do the math yourself, yeah, congrats, but I'll go on and tell you, that's a net change of negative 10,055 players, which is not ideal for one of the iconic licenses coming to the game. Now, I understand that some licenses are a lot more niche than others. Some are not expected to draw the same numbers. So you think of something like, I don't know, the Hellraiser license. Hellraiser's awesome, but it is a more niche property, so they probably didn't expect it to pull the same kind of numbers. Or maybe you look at something like Sadako Rising, which was obviously the Ringu chapter, and yeah, I mean, over the 3 months that game was big, and the reason, by the way, let me go on and say, I choose 3 months because every 3 months they put out a new DLC. So after 3 months, you can start making the case, well, okay, but there's something new in the game. Did that influence it? So that's, in case you're curious, that's why I'm going with 3 months after release to see what it's looking like for each chapter. And in the case of Sadako Rising, those 3 months actually saw a loss of 4,159 players on Steam. So not nearly as bad as what Xenomorph saw, but there was a loss. But when you compare it to the big kind of capital L licenses, you may notice something, right? So Project W, which was the second Resident Evil chapter, over 3 months, it added 1,113 players. Silent Hill saw an addition of 6,416 players. Stranger Things saw an addition of 4,210 players, and then most meaningful of all, the original Resident Evil chapter saw an increase of 10,526 players. Obviously, those numbers are not exactly something you would turn your nose up at, especially the original Resident Evil chapter, and it struck me as odd. It struck me as odd that we are looking at this and we're seeing the Xenomorph, we're seeing Ellen Ripley, we're seeing Alien lose almost the same amount of players that the game gained through the Resident Evil chapter. That is surprising to me. I'm not going to, I think you'll find that overall I'm not quite panicked by this, but I will say, if nothing else, I find that surprising. And I think we'll just circle back around to this at the end. I kind of want to return to the numbers in just a little bit. Right now, I want to go through some other aspects of, what worked, what didn't with this chapter, and try to talk about it in that regard. But put a pin in this. We are going to return to the player numbers and what my general thoughts are on that. So obviously, one of the major parts of any given chapter is going to be how were the characters themselves received. This matters a ton for original chapters, but I think it matters even more for licensed chapters because sometimes, so take for example, the Saw series. They got the Saw license, but with it, instead of adding say Jigsaw and I don't know, Dr. Gordon or Detective Carey, they added David Tapp, who's not exactly a popular character, and they chose Amanda instead of Jigsaw or even Hoffman. The choices were kind of strange there, but luckily we didn't really see anything like that with this one, where when you're making an Alien chapter, the Xenomorph is the only option. It's the obvious option, and that's what they went with. Now, I know there have been different versions of the Xenomorph over the course of the films, but they went with the classic, and that was the best decision. As far as the survivor, they could have gone with Amanda Ripley from Alien Isolation, but it's even better that they got Ellen Ripley, who is obviously more popular, more famous. Good choice there. Not having Sigourney Weaver's likeness definitely hurt, but look, there could be a positive spin for that. Hopefully it makes it easier to get skins in the future, and speaking of skins, Xeno has been eating good. 3 months out, Xenomorph has had some awesome skins. Xeno Queen is a massive, pun intended, success. Clone is just gnarly, just grisly, hard to look at. Fantastic killer skin. Grid looks really cool and definitely gives hope that Predator will join the game one day. And then the Blighted Xeno is just stunning, just absolutely perfect. As for Ripley, her base outfit is good, and I don't hate her sequel skin. But I'm not crazy about the Ripley 8 clone skin. I don't know. It looks like something somebody would wear in Mass Effect or something like that. Like, it's not necessarily my favorite skin. So yeah, like I said, Xenomorph is eating good, but Ripley may get the Hattie treatment, and you hate to see it, so I hope I'm wrong there. Overall, character reception was pretty good though. They got it right with their choices. I think nobody's gonna complain about that outside of maybe the likeness issue. As far as the map is concerned, look, they killed it again. They knocked it out of the park. The Nostromo wreckage was a very clever choice, and it was clever for many reasons. Everybody wanted the Nostromo, but I think a lot of people have kind of grown to be wary of indoor maps. So by having the ship's crash site serve as the map, they were able to cram the map full of alien references, which is awesome, but they were still able to make it kind of a proper DBD map, which is also awesome. It's a double win there. The aesthetic, great. Gameplay, all right. I don't think it's that bad. Overall, I think generally speaking, people are going to complain a lot about a map when it first comes out, and then it'll kind of settle in towards the middle of the pack more often than not. You have those like Garden of Joy that just stay awful, but for the most part, they all kind of settle towards the middle, and I think this one will do that. Obviously, a big part of any chapter is going to be the perks, and let's run through them. Okay, 6 perks, and I think this is kind of a rarity. This chapter was a bit of a rarity. It was rare in that there's not a single awful perk in here. None of these perks are without their use, and that's pretty cool to see. We'll go through the aliens first, the Xenomorph, I should say. Rapid Brutality, it's a promising perk. It pairs well with Save the Best for Last, and I think it may find greater usage in time. For now, let's just consider it a pretty neat perk that has the potential to be much better once Made for This is nerfed. If that nerf goes through, I think Rapid Brutality gets a lot stronger. Because right now, you get that 5% boost, and that's cool, but if they're already going 3% faster, you really got like a 2% boost, and all of a sudden that's a lot less meaningful. So where Made for This goes, I think will impact Rapid Brutality, but for the time being, it's a pretty cool perk, and I think there's a lot of potential for it. Alien Instinct is a well-designed perk that encourages killers to pursue wounded prey around the map, which is a pretty cool concept. It's not exactly meta, but it is a solid info perk that does come with a minor downside for survivors. So, you look at this one, is it ideal? Is it great? Is it fantastic? I wouldn't say any of those things about it, but I would say I could see myself using it. It's not one that I look at as like, yeah, like that'll happen. It's an all right perk. It's all right. In fact, it's better than all right. I'd say it's even good, probably. Decent. Though I suppose decent and alright are synonyms, so what do I know? Of course, the big one is Ultimate Weapon, and it's the most polarizing perk in this chapter, and I actually think it's the main reason why Calm Spirit is kind of bordering on meta for the first time in, let me check my notes, ever. So it's a great perk. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's denying there's a very strong perk, but I think it could use a slight nerf. All I would change about it is make the cooldown time a little harsher, because right now the way it works is the killer can open a locker, they can find where most everybody is. I mean, they're gonna get like 2 or 3 with it just about every time, and then they can go down somebody and just do it again. And that, to me, first off, it makes Doctor way less special. You kind of stealing Doctor's thing, but then I don't know. I think it could use a minor nerf, and outside of that, I think it'd be a pretty awesome perk. Moving over to the survivor side, Ellen Ripley came with Chemical Trap, which is a very fun perk, and I like that it rewards both doing the objective and then looping. So if you do the objective, you get a benefit when you loop, and that's really cool. Very awesome to see. It doesn't, at least in my experience, see a ton of use, but I do think it's kind of like Rapid Brutality. It's going to become more popular as time goes on. It's just not quite there yet. It's obviously going to be a lot better on certain maps than others. Like, you know, rip to any killer that has to face this on the meat plant. You may as well just kind of assume this one's not going to go so well. But yeah, Chemical Trap, what a fun perk. And I think when the first thing I think about with the perk is how fun it is, that's a well-designed perk. After that, we had Light-Footed. It's a sneaky good perk that does fit really well into stealth builds. I think that, okay, so running silently is way stronger than some people would think, and I think a 20-second cooldown, it's not that bad of a penalty. You're not going to look at a 20-second cooldown and say, well, I'm not going to bring that perk, when you consider that so many perks have 60-second cooldowns and 130-second cooldowns and all that. Overall, or 120 probably. But yeah, no, 20 seconds, that's nothing. It's a solid perk. It's, again, is it S tier? No, not even close, but it's all right. It's above the middle of the pack, I think. And then we have Lucky Star, which is just the ultimate companion piece to Quick and Quiet. Very cool perk. It's so nice for solo queue players. I think it's one that if you're running solo queue and you kind of feel like maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't have enough information on the average game, I would say run this perk and just see if you get some use out of it, because I think you will. Also, I guess Head On probably pairs well with it. Whatever the Nancy one is, they just changed its name again. So, you know, there are a couple of locker perks that, hey, you could just go for a full locker build with this one, which usually is something you think of killers doing, but it's kind of cool to think of survivors doing it. So very cool. Overall, these are stellar perks. And I can't believe I'm saying this because I try to be really critical here, but I'd give this chapter an A for its perk designs. I think that, you know, if you're going on the system of like, I don't know, S to F tier, none of these are worse than like a B tier perk. And that's pretty cool. And there's only one of them that really has a kind of problematic design. And even then, it's such a simple fix for Ultimate Weapon that, yeah, this is a really good batch of perks. So anybody that thinks this chapter failed certainly is not going to be looking at the perks to blame it. But that does bring me back to what I said I wanted to circle around to, which was this concept of the Steam charts, and they look at it and they say, oh, it's lost 10,000 players. Ooh, yeah, okay, I get that. I mean, look, I understand that, but respectfully, as somebody who's been there before, as somebody who's speaking from the same experience, I have to put it out there. We have got to stop caring about the Steam charts so much. And it's not because I'm saying ignore objective reality, just focus on the vibe. But there is something to that, right? I think that when you have a live service game, there's going to be ebbs and flows. And well, look, I have no doubt, yes, Behavior thought this one would be one of the spikes, and it wasn't necessarily. I think that ultimately you just have to look at that as more a case where people were just kind of frustrated with the state of the game in general. And it's not the Alien chapter not being good, because overall, you're looking at awesome characters, awesome perks, I think a generally awesome map. And then really the only standout negative, I would say, is the alien's power itself, which I haven't mentioned to this point. Overall, there are things to like about the power. I think the little underworld it can crawl through is very cool. I think that there's something to be said for the fact that it was essentially a slightly changed version of the Demogorgon at a time where people couldn't play the Demogorgon. So, you know, there are things to like, but obviously a lot of people probably feel like, as things currently stand, there's just not a ton of counterplay for a really good Xeno player, which couldn't be me. I can't hit the tail attack to save my life, but hey, you know, that's not really a reason to say, oh, it's not overpowered, I can't do it. It's like, oh, well, maybe I'm just bad, and I am. So, I don't know. I look at it and I think that the Xeno's power is definitely, to me, a downside, but I don't think that having a questionable power is enough to make it lose 10,000 players. Plenty of people don't like Nemesis's power, which is a hard word to say, and Nemi saw over 10,500 people join the game in his first 3 months, so you can't really say that the power is going to determine it all. I mean, and there are a lot of examples of that. Plenty of people don't like Pyramid Head's power. Over 6,000 players joined. So you can't just blame the power. I think that ultimately, people like to get on this they like to get on this thing where they say, okay, well, here are the trends, and the trends mean everything. But ultimately, the trends don't mean everything, and I guarantee you, the game will bounce back in a pretty strong way. So I mentioned earlier that Sadako Rising lost 4,100 something players before, in the first 3 months that it was out. But I think what gets lost in that is that the next month, which was the anniversary month, and it was the Dredge and Hattie and somehow the Garn of Joy and all that, that month saw 17,000 people hop back in the game. So I think that you have to take this as a thing of ebbs and flows. And look, if you have a straight year where every month is in the red, then you can say, okay, there's a problem here. But 3 months in the red, 4 months in the red, it's really not a big deal. And ultimately, I think that this talk of the Alien chapter failing is understandable, but I also think it's kind of silly. So that's just my 2 cents on that. I know that some people are gonna probably, if you don't, if you're smarter than me and you choose not to spend a lot of time on Twitter, you're probably unaware of people calling this one a failure. But I've seen a lot of people do it, and that's very anecdotal, and no, I'm not gonna share my homework, but but it is something I've seen. So I wanted to address it and say, like, hey, we're in a good place. Obviously, a lot of hype around this Chucky chapter. Stranger Things is back. Things are in a good place. And ultimately, we're going to look back and we're going to be super hyped that we have the Xenomorph, that we have Ellen Ripley, that we have the Nostromo as a map. We're going to be happy that we got the perks we did. And yeah, it's going to be weird. I think there's going to be one that probably will confuse behavior for a while. How this one lost 10,000 players. Because that is strange. But ultimately, I'm also pretty confident in saying from the amount of Xeno Queens I've seen running around that this chapter made a lot of money for behavior. So financially, we'll never know for sure unless they put out their financial records, which they won't. But we'll never know what they made off of this one. But I would actually go out on a limb and say, yeah, probably a lot of money. Probably a pretty penny. Probably mucho dinero. So I don't really worry about it being a failure. And I think that we as a community owe it to them to say, hey, it was a cool chapter. It was a fun chapter. Sometimes the breaks just aren't what you want it to be. But I am curious to know, have you even thought about this? Is this something that has occupied your mind, or do I just have too much time on my hands? And now that you are thinking about it, do you think the chapter was a failure? Did it let you down in some ways? What I'm really curious to know. Do you look at the Alien chapter and say, I kind of wanted more out of this? Or do you look at it and you say, I'm not disgruntled, I'm positively gruntled. I am properly gruntled. It's a solid chapter, because that's where I lean, but I'm curious where everyone else does. So please let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching the video. Hope wherever you are, you're having a lovely day. As always, I have been Das Food, and until the next video, bye friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my